Today, I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about how to connect National History Day to the New York State K-12 framework for social studies. I think that historians come at National History Day and they are more equipped to know how to think like a historian, whereas education majors tend to take a look at it from a standards-based um, project. So the goal is to try to make connections to National History Day. To do that, I thought an appropriate thing would just to be taking a look at this. This is actually from the social studies framework introductory pamphlet, and it's how to read the social studies framework. There are certain things that we're looking at for History Day. This is from the sixth grade curriculum. It is just, I liked how it broke up though, the standard. So we start off with the key ideas. And in these key ideas, we have in the example 6.5 comparative classical civilizations in the Eastern Hemisphere. Then it gives a time frame, so we know we're talking about classical civilizations. Then the key idea is stated as complex societies and civilizations change over time, the political and economic structures evolve. A golden age may be indicated when there is an extended period of time that is peaceful, prosperous, and demonstrates great cultural achievements. So this is the stated key idea in the comparative classical civilizations standard. These standards here arise from the National Council for the Social Studies. These are the overarching themes that are identified by the National Council of the Social Studies. So we have, and if you go into the document itself, the K-12 framework, it will make a connection between each of the key ideas in the course, and then they're going to connect it to one of the themes. And the old standards, which they transitioned to the K-12 framework in 2014. So they did make that transition. So some people might be more familiar with the old standards. From the key idea, we then have conceptual understandings. We see that as 6.5a, geographic factors influence the development of classical civilizations and their political structures. These are more specific statements. The nice thing about a K-12 framework is that they are very broad. Now that is actually something that is a hindrance for some newer teachers. It's easier for them to pick out what they're supposed to be covering on a specific topic. But the conceptual understandings is just elaborating a little bit on the key ideas. So as I was saying, they are broad. So you can take very specific topics in the K-12 framework. They might not specifically mention a topic, but it might fit in. The one that pops in my head is the civil rights era. They might not mention someone like, say, John Lewis, civil rights icon, but that would certainly be something that you could, if you wanted to, do something on History Day with the civil rights era. And be very specific, maybe John Lewis or someone who is a little bit more obscure. That's the nice thing about the K-12 framework. We can elaborate and make our standards fit our our activities in our activities is we want to get students researching, looking at primary and secondary sources, and trying to look at history in that historical lens. So we start off with the conceptual understandings. Then we go to the content specifications. I talk to my students and I tell them these are like the traditional objectives that the students that my students have to write. Students will locate the classical civilizations on a map and identify geographic factors that influence the extent of their boundaries, locate their cities on a map, and identify their political structures. So that actually has a couple of different objectives in there. You have students will locate classical maps and identify geographic factors that influence the extent of the boundaries, locate their cities on a map, and identify their political structures. So my students go and we are looking on a day-to-day basis. We are looking at the content specifications where we get into, we start off with the key idea, bring it down of bring the focus in a little bit on the conceptual understandings. Then you go into more details and get into the specific content specifications. The students will, the way that these are written, the students will, it gives performance activities. So if you wanted to have students analyze maps, if you wanted them to analyze other documents, if you want to draw comparisons between the Han Dynasty, the Greco-Roman societies, then you're able to do that by examining certain historical records. And it is encompassing a lot of different aspects of history. So this is actually available to you if you are trying to decipher or unpack the standards. We'll do that a little bit today in respect to National History Day. So stop share. The next step in my students' project was to go to the National History Day website and take a look at the resources page. And the resources page gave a list of different topics that could be used in under the theme of frontiers in history. So I went through and clicked on the resources to come up with a list of topics for my students to analyze and go through the Socialist K-12 framework for New York State to come up with connections for the K-12 framework for these selected topics as set forth by National History Day website. So from here, I had my students create a PowerPoint presentation that gives it gives the topic and the definition of the topic. It gives a picture or image of the theme. They do this just so they're able to locate sources. This is a dual project for me because I'm actually having students practicing strategies they could actually use to introduce History Day to their students. Um, so I gave each of my students the link for the K-12 framework and they got to work. And I'm going to share with you um, their hard work, trying to connect the standards to the topics that are listed over here. Now, uh, when you're reading the K-12 framework, the number they have a number and not they have a number and then a dot and then another number that is the first one indicates what grade level you are focusing on. My students focused just on the 11th grade curriculum. They could have gone and done the 8th grade curriculum, but in this project, we focused up in the high school, the 9 through 12 framework. Um, then my students decided that it would be neat to do the same thing for the global um, framework, to go through and try to on their own come up with different topics that you could take from a global history perspective. I know that some global history teachers who are National History Day curious want to do National History Day, but they don't know the standards and how it connects. So later on, I will be showing you some of the connections that are made between global history and the standards. So I'm going to stop share. So here is the work that my students did for this project. Again, this is a model of a teaching model that I was teaching them how to do. But what you would do is if you're using this in the classroom with your students, you could easily give them a list of topics, sort of like they have on the National History Day resource page. And you click on each of the topics and it goes into the details, almost like the key ideas, then getting into the content specifications in the K-12 framework. So it's the same idea. And my students went ahead and tried to make a connection to the idea of frontiers after reading the reading from National History Day about what the theme of frontiers is all about, not just it, well, in some cases, it's going to be the idea of manifest destiny and going out into frontiers. But sometimes the frontiers that they're going to be looking at and identifying are more of ideas. And that is one of the things is examining ideas for National History Day. So the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 would have a connection of the 11th grade. 11.3 is the actual standard, the key, the content specification. American nationalism was both strengthened and challenged by territorial expansion and economic growth. You would take the standard and try to give students assignments to analyze the strengths and challenges that the expansion of the United States caused. Then we have the Louisiana Purchase. And again, these standards, the nice thing about these standards is that, like I said, they're so broad. So you can add a lot of different topics in to the same standard. So you can easily take a National History Day project in your classroom and focus just on one standard. Maybe you wanted to focus in on 13, I'm sorry, 11. for your National History Day. Then you could have things like the Louisiana Purchase, which is in the same standard 11.3A. Then we have the annexation of Hawaii. That is 11.6A. In the late 1800s, various strategic and economic factors led to a greater focus on foreign affairs and debates over the US roles in the world. And again, making that connection to the themes of history. And I really recommend that you, if you're going to do this project, to do a scavenger hunt with your students and have them go through the K-12 framework on their own and try, because students, we as educators are supposed to share the standards with students anyway, so they could actually analyze the standards, analyze what they're supposed to be learning to try to come up with ideas for History Day. Going down the list, Apollo 11, and that's 11.9B. The United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a nuclear arms race that eventually led to agreements that limited the arms buildup and improved United States-Soviet relations. We have the final frontier of the race in these themes and frontiers in history. I think that having students try to think in relation to the theme is important in terms of trying to get them to think like historians. Then sometimes frontiers are, like I said, ideas and are giving people new opportunities they never had before. It's appropriate for the Civil War amendments, which are in 11.3 in the social studies standards. Moving on to the 20th century, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the actual connection is 11.4A. Again, you could go into that one section of the K-12 framework and find several ideas. As America was growing, they're building their frontier on several avenues. Then you can find a lot of things just from this area of the content. So probably you would want to time this, and actually some of the topics that are being presented here would probably be covered in class around the time of National History Day. So it might be interesting for students to actually present all their work to their classes, which I know that some local schools do for their History Day projects. Women's suffrage is another topic that the National History Day has identified. And that goes into 1110B. Individuals of diverse groups and organizations have sought to bring about change in American society through a variety of methods. The Equal Rights Amendment, this is 1110B, also fitting into the standards. Again, it's easy to make connections to the standards, because even though, let's just say they wanted to do a project on Sri Lanka or something like that, they can find a connection in the framework, not in the US framework, the 11 section of the K-12 framework that's in the 11 section, but it would certainly be something that they could find in the global sections. Let's see what other topics. Americans with Disabilities Act. It guaranteed equal opportunities for individuals with disabilities in public accommodations, and that also goes into the 11.10 point 10B. Individual diverse groups and organizations have sought to bring about change in American society through a variety of methods. And I think this is the last one. The Fair Labor Standards Act creates the right to minimum wage and time and a half overtime pay when people work over 40 hours a week. And that comes up in 11.8B. And you can also, let's see if I can find it real quickly. Here we go. Stop share. Sorry about this. Just take a look at what the actual standards you would be looking at would or your students would be looking at in the classroom. This is the actual document. You can get it. It's located on the New York State Ed website. A lot of the topics that were in History Day had to deal with expansion, nationalism, and sectionalism. And it's always good to focus on themes. So I think this is a topic, or these topics that were set up really were having students think thematically about the idea of frontiers. So this is what the actual K-12 framework looks like. And this is these can include different topics that History Day has identified. So now I wanted to show you some examples of global. So in terms of global, I had my students go through the K-12 framework for the 10th grade material. I chose mostly 10th grade material because that is what appears on the new global history and geography regions. So one of the first things that you could use for National History Day with Frontiers is obviously the age of exploration. There are so many different dynasties they can look at. They can look at growing maritime empires. You could talk about any of the explorers. My students in particular picked Marco Polo is a possible person that someone could take a look at for frontiers in history. Then we have definitely, you could connect the theme of frontiers to the Enlightenment and the idea of revolution. Enlightenment thinkers developed political philosophies based on natural laws, which included concepts of the social contract, consent of the governed, and the rights of citizens. And we know in these Enlightenment thinkers had their ideas spread all over the globe. So this would be certainly something that you could easily put into a History Day project right into your 10th grade curriculum. Even though there is the Regents exam, that I know that a lot of teachers kind of freak out about, but the way I see it is if you're having students think thematically and having them connect the idea of frontiers to different concepts of frontiers, that's actually helping them think with the skills they need to how to connect things to the things like the enduring issues. The concept, how does frontiers fit into the idea of enduring issues? Interesting. The Industrial Revolution is another thing, any type of revolutionary, it can be political, it could be social, it could be economic. The agricultural revolution in Great Britain that led to um, the the growth of Great Britain as a country. Then you could have imperialism. I don't know if I would really choose that. You could have the creation of the United Nations. Um, you could have, let's see what else we could have here. Um, you could have things like modernization, talking about talking about technology, here it is, 10.9 technological changes in communication and transportation systems allow for instantaneous interconnections and new networks of exchange between people and places that have lessened the effects of time and distance. They can talk about how the growth of the internet. You could talk about if you wanted to if you wanted to do ninth grade curriculum, you could do the printing press, although that might be in in the end of ninth grade. Um, but there are a lot of different um, ideas that you could talk about, like the Green Revolution, for example, in 10.9C. You can make that connection. You can talk about the creation of the Universal Nations, Universal Declaration of Human Rights is something you could do. So you could see that even in the global um, framework, you can find examples that you could use in your History Day projects.